There we go. And I need to check the time. I know several of you are watching these episodes with me, so to speak. I do apologize about the delay. I'll talk about that in just a second here. But my summary of this episode is going to be very brief because I don't want to spoil too much. This is the episode in which this is the second episode in which the Kazon show up in the first season. Has to do with a bit of a mystery involving several of the crewmates and a possible saboteur. That's all I'm going to say. Now, I want to talk about one thing really quick. This is kind of a two-parter. I actually don't remember if I've answered this first question in full detail, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I'll go ahead and make note of the time for when I'm done, so those of you who don't care can, get on with it. I have been asked directly and indirectly, why Voyager? Of all the wonderful shows, I have so many things to say about. Why talk about Voyager? Again, I honestly don't remember if I've answered this question or not, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but Voyager is very interesting to talk about. Voyager is an enjoyable show in my opinion. It obviously has its bad parts, but then even the greatest shows have bad parts. But Voyager is a show that is enjoyable and yet not it is just enjoyable enough without actually reaching up to its full potential to be a great show. But at the same time it's also bad, but not bad enough to be a terrible show. Does that make any sense? It's like right in the middle. It's kind of blurred across both sides here. And that's one of the reasons I find it so fascinating to think about and to talk about, was because so much potential was on display and so many good things were on display, while at the same time so many bad things were on display, often in the same episode and often in contradiction of each other. It's such a weird concept. So I've spent so much time in my life when I'm talking about, talking with fellow trekkers about Star Trek. One of the things that comes up most often is Voyager because there's so much to talk about. So that's why Voyager. The second thing, I admit freely that I have been somewhat hesitant about continuing to do my Voyager reviews. I had gotten the impression, possibly undeserved, that people were getting irritated with me doing these Voyager reviews, that they wanted me to get back to doing just game reviews, and that's the reason why I slammed out four or so right in a row, right around when I did my Half-Life 2 one, and have been releasing them bit by bit, was because I figured, oh my god, I better get the game reviews going again. Don't mistake me, I wasn't pushing myself. Well, okay, yes, I was pushing myself, but I was still trying to do, my damn job and actually do a decent video. But I had been getting that impression more and more, and several of the comments I have seen lately, which is, of course, a relative term, since I have no idea when this video is going to go up in relation to when I record it, have been a lot more encouraging, and I just wanted to say thank you to those of you who have had kind words of encouragement. I actually went back and started looking at my viewing figures. Believe it or not, I usually don't look at my views when it comes to videos. I look at my comments because I get those in an email format and I can go through them on a daily basis. But I found out that my Voyager reviews actually had quite a few video reviews, or video views, much more than I thought they would. And so that actually kind of made me smile a bit, because I was worried I was wasting your guys' time, and everyone's just like, oh, get on with it. And then I saw several people who were talking about, how they've been watching the series with me and have been waiting on me and, trying to do this other day thing. So bottom line is thank you for your support and for your continued attention, and I hope this continues to be interesting enough for me, for it to be worth continuing to watch. Now, let's see, hang on. I actually have several notes on this one, but they're all in a strange order because I actually have quite a bit to talk about in this one, so you'll forgive me. This one might be one of those longer than the episode deals. Well, speaking of which time it is, 3:30. I need to make a note of that. Okay, still recording? Yes. The mouse thing is kind of sensitive. Sometimes it stops recording. I have to start all over again. It's kind of irritating. Right at the beginning, there was actually a great deal of potential with the scene. Okay, for those of you who haven't seen the episode, it starts off with Lieutenant Carey literally running down the hills. He's like, yes, I found fruit. It's awesome. Look. And right in that scene, we get a lot of information dumped without them actually saying it, which is a good thing. Obviously, they're on this M-class planet that they found, and this is probably one of the first M-class planets they found that actually has some kind of life growing on it, and they want to try and gather supplies. Awesome. All of that is excellent info dump and really works with the overall theme of Voyager, or at least what the theme of Voyager is supposed to be. So definite props there. They also had a great opportunity, which I again feel like started out like this and was changed, because one of the things I've mentioned before is how a scene feels like it was written in a certain manner, but the way it's presented is not. Sometimes that could be put on the director, sometimes that can be put on the actors, but it is my opinion that most often, especially with regards to Neelix, it comes off to the writers. And I do say writers, plural, because picture this, if you will. I'm writing a scene, okay? In this scene, they're on a planet, and Neelix demonstrates his survival skills. Demonstrates them. Doesn't say, I'm great at survival, and then walks off. No, no. He actually shows that he has these skills by identifying several plants that are poisonous, which the Starfleet crewmen had not picked out, and then, to help them out, identify several things that are, in fact, edible, and things that they can show. That's it. That's all. That's all I'm going to write. Because I'm the framework writer is what I like to call it. I forget what the professional term is. I hand this off to the person who's actually doing the script, and he says, "All right, what should I do?" And the heads up, in this case that would be Rick Berman, says, "We need comedy. Neelix is our comedy character. Make it funny." And the guy looks down and says, "I have no idea how to make this funny." I feel like this happens so often, Neelix, because the bare bones of this scene is actually quite fine. Neelix demonstrates that he actually has a brain, and we could have even had a nice little take at the fact that these Federation people, especially Lieutenant Carey and whatnot, probably are quite used to living rather cushily, all things considered. I'm not trying to yell at them or anything. I'm just saying, by the standards of most of the other races in Star Trek, especially in the Delta Quadrant, these people live in the life of luxury, even on their ship with limited resources. And so Neelix, being someone who's used to not, and indeed Chakotay, who's also there, being someone who's used to not, you could see both of them working together to try and get some kind of compromise going because, A, both of them, this is the point at which Neelix has already become morale officer, right? So both of them have a vested interest in A, getting actual supplies to help the crew stay, have them be nutritious, or have them get their proper nutrition and be properly taken care of, and B, keep their morale up. And anybody will tell you, bad food that tastes terrible, I don't care how good it is for you. The longer you eat it, the worse you're going to feel. That is simply a fact of life. I can tell you that from personal experience, and I know several other people who can as well. So both of them would have worked to try and be like, okay, we found this root, for example, this Iola root or whatever it is, and it tastes absolutely horrible. What can we do with it? And why not have them try to hash that out? Why not try to have them make that work? And, something. You could have even had that led into the Seska scene. Why not have Seska also there, and Seska and Carey both go off in order... This comes into a change I'll talk about later in more detail, but let's say Seska and Carey both go off in order to try and find these mushrooms that they both spotted in the area and see if maybe those can help spice it up a bit, add to the flavor so it's not as bad. And Chakotay's like, yeah, go for it. And then we have the whole Kazon thing and blah, blah, blah. My point is, again, as usual, it was so close to being interesting, and then it just kind of teetered off into this attempt at comedy that failed miserably. Um, let's see, let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit here. I do actually really like, hang on a second, which one's next? This one. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't really like this scene. I'm going to talk about another scene next. Neelix... The Seska and Chakotay scene was actually pretty decent, all things considered, with a couple of problems. First and most powerful problem of this entire scene, we have not seen so much as one hint of even the tiniest bit of friendship, let alone affection, between Seska and Chakotay, ever. If you're going to have something like that, put it in there in advance. Plan it out in advance. Put signs of it. And by the way, I want to stress that I think this Seska and Chakotay relationship thing not only made perfect sense, but would have actually added to the overall plot and story arc of Seska and Chakotay. So yes, definitely. In several of the previous episodes, just have her chummy up to him. Have her be close to him. Just little things. It doesn't even take that much. She has this wonderful line where he basically says that's not the point or something like that, and she says, I know what the point is. Can we make up now? And it was said so perfectly that it didn't come across as crass so much as comfortable, if that makes any sense. It came across with the mentality that these two have been close enough that she can say that because the two of them have been down this road before. You follow me? I thought it was actually rather well portrayed. I would have fleshed out that scene considerably. Forgive me again for mentioning a complaint here, but Neelix, the whole we had to stage an incident in order to get into the kitchen in order to cook this soup for you incident. Sci-fi debris went off on this scene significantly. I don't want to go over it too badly, but suffice it to say that A, Neelix is not the Gestapo of the or the Gestapo of the frickin' kitchen. He does not have absolute rule thereof. He is probably in charge, even my version of Neelix isn't. My version of Neelix is at the very least in charge of trying to keep things organized and taken care of. And my version of Neelix, if someone walked up and said, I want you to cook this soup in this manner, would have said, you got it. Their version of Neelix decided to do with the comedy and go with this whole ridiculous, I have several suggestions for punishment, Commander Chakotay, in case you want my recommendations. It's pointless. It's stupid. It's not funny, and it's filler. Every single second spent on the whole on in that scene spent on the Neelix subplot, which is almost half of that whole scene, by the way. I actually went and timed it just to make my point here. Could have been spent instead flushing out the Seska and Chakotay thing. Now, I mentioned before I would have had hints of this, that we actually see that these two are close people. This would have been the first time I would have really gotten into it. I don't think I would have had them kiss or get too intimate, but I would have, well, not too physically intimate, but I would have had them get intimate. Do you know what I mean by that? To show through physical action and through their the way in which they're comfortable with each other. Something so simple as when she goes behind to hold him behind the back, and he's just standing there, and he looks so forlorn because he's worried about this whole Kazon thing, and he's worried about whether or not they're going to be able to stretch these supplies, and that they had to cut this mission short. And it seems like no matter what they do, he's constantly in danger. I would have had Chakotay pouring his heart out to this woman about how stressed he feels because it feels like they can't get a break out here in the Delta Quadrant. And as he is standing there staring out the window, frustrated and angry, she comes up and holds him from behind and just hugs him close. And all he would have to do is just this tiny little gesture of leaning his head back up against hers. And that by itself would have spoken volumes to how close those two people were at one point, and to some extent or another still are. I'm sorry, I would have helped. Again, as usual, I'm going to start talking about my changes as I go. The biggest change I'll save for last, though, don't worry. But now a scene that I actually did rather like. The idea that reverse engineering technology that is ridiculously advanced when you really get down to it, having such catastrophic results, is something I very much enjoyed in this episode. Granted, we've actually seen hints of this before in TNG, actually, but I really liked the concept because it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Even accepting, obviously we have been watching Star Trek for some time, especially if you're like me and you've been watching it since the original series. The idea of a transporter or a replicator is quite old news at this point. But imagine a species so in advance that they don't have transporters. They don't have anything about matter replication whatsoever. They don't have matter-energy matter conversion at all. These concepts are so far advanced that we here in the real now haven't even gotten off of the ground floor of figuring out to do the two-way conversion. Matter to energy? Possibly. Energy to matter? Very unlikely. Both in one conversion? Completely impossible. I shouldn't say impossible. I don't want to use that word, because that word gets thrown around too much. But it is so far beyond what we're at now. Imagine someone at our level of scientific progress, or even just barely past us, because let's be honest, the Kazon are not exactly advanced, being given a replicator or a transporter and trying to reverse engineer it. Don't you think that would have ended in a massive explosion and a lot of death? Because I sure as hell do. And I really like the way they portray that. It made perfect sense, and it was in full context with everything. I actually really enjoyed it. I'm sorry, I have nothing but good things to say about that, because it is a good thing to actually show. One of the problems Star Trek tends to have is that everything is universally adaptable with everything else, basically. One of the humorous comments I've heard before is that the real advancement of technology in Star Trek is the fact that one video format works for every view screen in the entire series. Now, while that is of course a joke, if you think about it, there is actually a real point in that, isn't there? We here, with our significantly advanced technology, can't even get one single solid video format. I can't even get this video to be in the proper resolution without going out and buying a brand new device in order to do so, for example. Or to use some specific technology in order to convert it like that, which I don't have the time or money to do. So, my point I'm trying to get across here is that we see levels of a technology in Star Trek that are incredibly advanced, and all of them seem to work with each other perfectly. There's even a frickin' part in First Contact, a movie I like, mind you, where Picard picks up a chunk of a Borg here and plugs it into his tricorder and can figure out what the big evil plan is on it. That's how adaptable everything is to everything else. I really liked then this acknowledgement of the fact that not everyone has the universal controller or the USB port to everything. I liked the fact that they actually demonstrated sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes they don't understand it, sometimes they can't make it work. And I liked how they didn't flinch from showing just how brutally horrific it can be. not just the people half melded in the walls, but the guy who was alive, and I gotta use quote unquotes here, because he actually had parts of his cells merged with metal. That's how badly it had gone. And the doctor talking in really brusque tones about how he's going to try to fix this guy. If you actually think about the procedure he's talking about and the sheer severity of it, you get a point for just how catastrophic this really was. The doctor has an almost throwaway line about, how he was the lucky one. The doctor says, well, he might not be. I forget how he says it, but he basically says, I don't know if I agree with that. And I agree with the doctor. I'm not sure that guy was the lucky one. I'm sorry if I keep hashing this over, but it's so nice to see Star Trek do something right like this, and I just wanted to emphasize that point. Let's see. Gestapo thing. I already mentioned that. Ah, yes. Speaking of things this episode does very well, let me pause for a moment. Obviously, I try to go over details, but I'd like to just give you a general sense of what it is I tend to enjoy in Star Trek episodes. My favorite Star Treks of all time are ones that tend to be in-depth, touch on really important themes, have very important character growth, that kind of thing, right? The Inner Light comes to mind. Measure of a Man. This is also TNG. Shoot, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble thinking of the episode name. In the Pale Moonlight. That's a DS9 episode. And there's, of course, Best of Both Worlds, which I do think believes in this. But there's another one in TNG I wanted to list. Shoot, I suddenly can't think of it. Oh my god, I'm sorry, this is going to bug the crap out of me. I do apologize, but this is going to bother me unless I actually find it out. What episodes were you in? Tapestry. I can't believe I didn't think of that. Tapestry, which is the episode where Q brings Picard into the past and the future and the afterlife and all that fun stuff. Not the future. That's Best of Both Worlds. Another good episode. My point is these episodes all have a very strong... you could look at all these episodes and they all basically have the same framework of strength that makes them my favorite episodes. They're all very character-driven. Yes, even Best of Both Worlds is extremely character-driven. Every single one of them has genuine pathos behind it, not just melodrama, which I'm just like, but actual drama, on the edge of my seat, what happens next drama. Every single one of them has something that is engaging and deep and generally pertinent to our real life mentality. All of these things are what make truly amazing episodes of Trek, in my opinion. But what I tend to enjoy in an episode, this especially is true as in Voyager, is when they do things, little things, but lots of little things properly. Like the thing about the technology going bad I just mentioned, like the thing I'm about to mention, like the fact that the actors were actually acting like people. This is one of those very few episodes Chakotay actually acts like a person in, and I really liked that. And this is also an episode where we get to learn a decent amount about Chakotay's personality. We don't learn about his past, we don't learn about his history, what we do learn is his mentality. Because what we find out throughout this episode, you forgive me for skipping ahead of it, is the fact that Chakotay is, at his heart, despite everything, despite pragmatism, despite being a Maquis and a leader, and all of these things, he is ultimately an optimist. As I said earlier, he is chaotic good, as opposed to lawful good, and he wants to believe in the best for people. He wants people to redeem themselves. He wants to believe in the better human, and this is why it was possible for so many others to take advantage of that. And it bothers him to such a great degree, and it bothers. I feel that Beltran put this in his performance well enough that I can actually say this with strength. He wasn't so much bothered by the fact that people were taking advantage of him. He was bothered because he didn't want to change who he was. He didn't want to stop being optimistic. He didn't want to stop being idealistic. He didn't want to say, okay, I'm going to be pragmatic and cynical and realistic from now on, and then people won't take advantage of me, because, true. He wanted to keep going, being the guy who wants to give someone a second chance, And in that we get an actual shot of, oh my god, characterization within Voyager. Another thing I really like. Now let's get to this next point. I'm sorry for derailing there, but I really wanted to talk about that for a moment. I have been asked to give a good example of technobabble, which is technobabble, which isn't actual science, being used properly. This episode is probably without question, well, I shouldn't say without question. If I really thought about it and watched every episode of all Star Trek evers right in a row, I could probably find better examples. But within Voyager, this is probably one of my favorite examples right here. They're trying to get this item out of the Kazon ship. There's a ton of radiation in there, and the radiation is making it so you can't beam in. They have two possible solutions, both of which are dangerous, both of which have issues. The technobabble in both cases is summarized within a few lines. Not, and when I say a few lines, I'm talking like da 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 da. That's the technobabble involved. And the synopsis of it for the viewer, because we have no idea what da 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 means, is one mistake and you're dead. That's almost exactly what Torres says. The other one is very simple, very logical, involves like 2 words of technobabble, and basically involves rotating the field out so they can actually reach the part they need. Both of these make sense, both of these actually advance the plot, and both of these are pertinently relevant to the overall theme of this episode, which I'll get to in a bit. Very excellent example. And again, a good thing, a good example of how to use this technobabble problem and properly. Now, let's see here. Pardon me. Let's go ahead and skip ahead a bit. Now, this is the point in which I'm going to say, if you haven't watched this episode yet, I don't know how you guys are doing it, if you're watching these first or the episodes first. I would personally recommend watching the episodes first, but that's just my opinion. That's the way I think. But I'm not going to spoil the big thing about the episode. Couple things here. Okay, that's good enough. Seska's the one who did it, right? Now, Seska gives this wonderful speech about how she's... Well, okay. Let me actually take a step back. There's actually there's one thing I want to talk about first. I just forgot about. I apologize. I understand that they keep trying to show Voyager as the tolerant, understanding, peace-loving hippies of the future. I'm sorry for saying it so derisively, but it's true. They go too far, is what I'm trying to say. If you want to believe in the better future of humankind, you know what? I'm totally okay with that. Pragmatism does have its place, especially when you're a captain in charge of your ship, and letting several people who you know are hostile on your ship, who then immediately ask to see an injured individual who is probably also hostile, and then kill him right in front of you. You really have no one to blame but yourself for that. And I cannot believe they didn't see that coming, because they already at this point had a very strong suspicion that there was a saboteur, or indeed a traitor in their midst, someone who was selling technology to the Kazon. Why in the world would they want to give the Kazon leaders access to the one individual who can tell them what they need to know? What were they thinking on that one? I'm sorry, I just had to comment on that. That was not a smart idea. That's all I got to say on that. Yes, I know that it was Seska's idea. We were told that pretty explicitly. She's the one who contacted them and said, hey, come deal with this. But still, I can't believe Janeway went along with that. Sorry, now getting on to Seska. Seska gives a rather wonderful little speech about why she did what she did. And I love this speech for many reasons. If you really break down what she's saying, the actress does a beautiful job. I'd just like to take a moment and praise the actress who plays Seska. She does a beautiful job of playing her role perfectly. For all of the previous episodes up to including pretty much the reveal, she portrays the perfect type of just slightly irritated at being, she's a good liar is what I'm getting across, and she portrays that very well. And when she finally reveals her true self, so to speak, she puts genuine passion in her voice, and you can basically, even though she looks like a Bajoran, you can see the Cardassian in her, and I think that was extremely well done. Definite kudos to the actress and whatever the director was involved in that. But she gives this impassioned speech, which basically makes complete sense, okay? Now here's the catch. One of the things she talks about is how we need to start making alliances. We need to start, in exchange for protection, in exchange for help, all we would need to do is give up a few pieces of information and technology. Now, Janeway brings up the obvious point. Well, actually, no, she doesn't, but she brings up the stupid point, forgive me, which is that would destabilize the power in the sector. Now, I say that's the stupid point because, not because it's stupid, but because of course it would. And then Seska points out it would destabilize it in their favor. But both of them are missing what I think to be the obvious point. If you have a band of thugs, which is what the Kazon are within the actual series, who have very little understanding of anything, and basically use what they take, so, again, thugs, these guys being given this level of technology, taught how to use it, and allowed to replicate it, don't you think that's going to be a problem, not just for the sector, which is of course a huge issue, let me make that clear, and are probably going to use it to, build an actual empire and conquer most of the region, but are then immediately going to turn on you because now they have numbers and technology on their side? We are supposed to believe that the Kazon are already a problem just with numbers on their side. Why in the world would this decision be made? This is the biggest and indeed the strongest failing point of the whole episode, in my opinion. One of the things, and this is one of those things that's just a problem with television in general. They wanted the Kazon to be the big bad guys of the area. Have I mentioned that this is the second episode they've been seen in since you know, the trailer, or not the trailer, the pilot? This is the second episode in which the Kazon have been in. Not exactly some big horrible threat when you get down to it, are they? And the more we see of them, the more pathetic they get as we go on. But even within the understanding that we have of them, the Kazon are without question the worst possible choice for this kind of deal to be made with. There are so many other species you could have tried and made this kind of deal with. Indeed, multiple species. In fact, actually, if you'll forgive me, the Talaxians would have been another excellent example of a species that you could have made this deal with. But no, we'll just make it with the Kazon because Seska. Well, no, I'm not even going to blame that on Seska. I blame that fully on the writers and the creative producers who wanted the Kazon to matter for some reason. So, while I agree with most of her reasoning, the specific use of the Kazon was retarded at best. But even, let's ignore that for a moment, okay? Bear with me. Let's say she found a species like the Talaxians who are willing to make a deal for, transporter and replicator technology. And in exchange, the Talaxians were going to give military aid. And the Talaxians were, from what we see of them, other than Neelix, let me make that clear, even within the series, the Talaxians are well known for being good at warfare, are very reliable, and tend to be rather nice people, all things considered. Right? There are some. Obviously, this is a generalization because it's hard to categorize a whole species with one or two words. But you get the point, right? My point is, let's say they go ahead and keep their bargain. Even within that context, what Seska is saying is still technically wrong, but only by a few degrees of severity. Everything she says with an obvious passion of someone who wants to build a power base. Everything she does is something with that Cardassian mindset of, as we were shown way back in Chains of Command, back on TNG, they instinctively seek to dominate. That's the Cardassian mentality, right? And so we see in her the her instinctively reaching out to whatever this powerful race, the Talaxians, in order to build this alliance, which she would probably try to keep working with in order to advance it, in order to expand it, in order to try and actually put the Voyager crew at the top of this web of alliances and mutual defense treaties, in order to actually build, like I said, a power base out here, in order to actually build what is effectively a new federation. Now, that idea has a great deal of promise. I think she was too extreme in her application, and I think, frankly, that she should have, well, I guess I've already made that point. I'm sorry. I am a little bit tired. It's rather late. Point is, if she had scaled that idea back a little bit in her presentation of it, or if we had at the very least seen someone else argue her side of the viewpoint, except not as extremely, I would have rather enjoyed that, because, again, most of the points she makes are extremely valid points. Instead, what we get is the only argument given in return is a single line by Janeway, which is altering the balance of power into this quadrant. That's all she says. That's the only attempt at a counter-argument made. And that is, let me be frank, speaking as someone who has done debate as well, that is not a counter-argument. That is a single point that can be then debated upon. Now, yes, she was kind of interrupted in it, but my point is, if you're going to try and present your side of an argument, you don't start it with, by the way, water tends to be wet. It doesn't work that way. Unless you're trying to do something in what I like to call lawyerese, in which case, go over there. Now, let's talk about some changes. Actually, you know what? There's one other thing I want to mention. Right at the end, there's this coda with Chakotay and Tuvok. I actually really like this scene because Chakotay comes to Tuvok and he's rather upset. He's rather angry. And again, this is that characterization thing I was talking about. He's so upset at himself. He's so upset at the fact that he doesn't want to be, this bitter, cynical person who just believes he's going to get the worst in everyone. And he talks with Tuvok about it, and Tuvok is actually quite nice by Vulcan standards. He's quite nice and quite helpful, and indeed rather comforting, again, by Vulcan standards. And Chakotay says, awesome. And then Tuvok admits that Siska had pulled the wool over his eyes as well, and Chakotay leaves and he's like, yes. And Tuvok turns and says, I don't understand why you would think that to be a good thing. And Chakotay just says, misery loves company. And while that line obviously has its own obvious implications, I love that because that theme of that humanity within Chakotay is so present in that term, and the way he smiles about it. Because in that, Chakotay has reaffirmed within himself that he doesn't have to change who he is. Even Tuvok, someone who is not as emotional as Chakotay is, someone who is not bound by his morality and his gut instinct as much as Chakotay is, someone who works through logic and through reasonable thought process, was still fooled by Seska, which means that Chakotay wasn't necessarily in the wrong for being that idealistic person, and therefore could still keep doing that. I really wish we'd seen more of this Chakotay, because I really liked those revelations of the character, and it really added to him. Now I'm going to talk about a few other things. I don't want to talk about Seska as a whole. I'm not even sure when I want to talk about Seska as a whole, because there's several episodes that are basically about her. But I'm going to save that one for later, because this video's already gone on a little bit long. There's two things I really want to talk about. One is my big change to this overall thing, and the other is the Kazon. Let's make this absolutely clear. The Kazon were a bad idea. The Kazon were implemented poorly. The Kazon were then continued to be implemented poorly. And the more we saw of them, the less interesting it got. Forgive me for borrowing, but Sci-Fi Debris once mentioned that seeing the Kazon actually be threatening was such a shock to him. And I say borrowing because I had the exact same reaction. When Basics comes around at the end of Season 2, I'll get to that eventually, don't worry, the Kazon actually accomplished something. Now that may sound like, oh my god, they... No, seriously, the Kazon actually accomplished something for the first time in the entire show. And, I might add, for the last time in the entire show. For that one episode, the Kazon accomplished something, and it was only because of continuous effort and the intervention of Seska that they managed it at all. That's how pathetic the Kazon are. Now, it's obvious what they were going with the Kazon. They wanted a Norse Viking kind of thing going on. And unfortunately that comes off as very Klingon because most people don't know how to write that kind of character. But, and indeed the Klingons themselves kind of lean towards the Norse, especially in the DS9 and the late TNG era. But moving along. They wanted the rough, oh, we're out here on our own, we're not advanced, but we've got tons of us, and we just take what we want kind of thing. And I don't think that's very interesting or engaging as a villain any more than like a one-off. And I think many people would agree with me on that. The Kazon as presented should have been basically a one-off or possibly a two-off villain, nothing more. They needed something else to be an effective long-term villain, if a long-term villain is what they wanted. Let us keep in mind that the very concept of a long-term villain is something that is problematic. Why? Because Voyager is very rarely not moving. Yes, obviously they make stops in order to get supplies and repairs and interact with whatever species they can in order to make trades. But overall, Voyager keeps going this way, trying to get home, right? Thus, any power that is going to present a long-term threat for them in terms of a political body, such as an organization, like a kingdom or a nation or whatever, is going to either have to be huge or advanced enough in order to keep up with them, or literally constantly keeping up with them and being nomadic, and because they think this prize is worth it. This is another reason, one of the reasons why the Vidians kind of failed to pan out, in my opinion. In order to have a consistent bad guy like that, you need to solve these problems creatively, and they never did with the Kazon. For some reason, the Kazon and Seska herself somehow just keep up with Voyager, and they never explain why. They never do elaborate on it whatsoever. Yes, you could argue that there are reasons for it. Yes, you can explain it. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it doesn't fully make sense. What I'm saying is they never bothered to make it make sense. They were just lazy about it. Here's the Kazon. They're the villains for the show. But the show's constantly moving. Yeah, but the Kazons are the villains of the show. Alright? Just put some effort into it, guys. That's all I'm asking. Now, an idea was posed by one of my commenters, which I actually really like. I apologize, I don't know your actual name, obviously, but I wanted to give you credit on this one if you happen to watch this video. And I don't remember your name. I'm sorry, I don't remember the commenter name. I'd have to go look it up. But whoever's watching this will probably know this. They mentioned that my idea for the Vidians, the sect of pirates, would actually work very well as a part of what the Kazon actually were. In this case, make the Kazon a larger organization that consists of multiple species and stretches a great deal of area, and make the Vidians like an enforcement team within that does piracy on the side, that kind of thing, or is used as sort of freelance thugs by whatever the Kazon equivalent of the SS team is. You know what I mean? which I like that idea quite a lot. And I took that thought as I was watching this episode and I started to run with it. Why not actually take that a further step? Now, a lot of you are going to accuse me for aping DS9 on this, I imagine. Admittedly, I had already written this down and had, in fact, started prepping for this video when I realized this connection. So if it makes you feel any better, I'm not doing this on purpose. Why not have the Kazon and the Vidians, and indeed most of the other species they've encountered so far, be a member species of a much, much larger organization, a much, much more powerful organization, one that allows its members a certain degree of autonomy as long as they keep in line with whatever that organization says, and is basically a group that rules with an iron fist. Now, let's say they rule through a very specific combination of propaganda, fear, and military application, okay? Their technology is not overly advanced. For example, let's go ahead and say they don't have transporters, which also means they don't have your most basic matter energy conversion process mastered, which also means they don't have things like replicators and renewable energy resources, right? Thus, as I just highlighted, all of those things that Voyager does have in abundance as casual items of everyday use would be something that this Empire would be very, very interested in. Why not have it such that the Kazon, who are the let's say the Kazon is in fact the term given to the enforcement arm of this greater organization, and the Vidians were just a single group, a single pirate band within the Kazon sect. And then this overall organization is something that Seska has been contacting this whole time because she started paying attention. She was listening. She every time they'd go planet side, she would get some information because she's trying to do this whole build alliances thing, and she finds out about this massive organization, and she realizes that she could try and make an alliance with them directly and try and balance the scales. Now, she would be intelligent enough to know that just handing over their technology and saying, here, please help us out, isn't going to work, not with an organization that militant and that oppressive. But she could try and make deals as they go with some of its individual groups. Thus, in this overall setup, while she wouldn't work with, I don't know, say the Kazon or the Vidians, and my envisioning of them, the Kazon being the militia and the Vidians being the pirates here, she could work with this team over here, piloted by the Bobvilles or whatever. I haven't thought of a species name because it doesn't matter. This particular organization, this one specific division within this overall group that would be willing to work with her and would be willing for its own personal reasons to keep these secrets on the side and try to use this in order to build their own power base within this overall group, that kind of thing. And that's the sort of thing I think she would go with. I imagine Janeway would still be opposed to it, but why not make that one of the overall threats of the first season and a half, and then at the end of season 2 we would lead into, again, this is me talking ahead a bit, but the interactions with Seska and her alliance with the let's just come up with a name here, with the Terranox, okay? Seska and the Terranox over here, and the Terranox clan, or no, the Terranox enclave. I like that. The Terranox enclave is constantly trying to get back a hold of Voyager, and Seska lays it out for them. They have kicked me off. I can help you get to the rest of the Voyager and take what you need from them. And the Terranox are not as explicitly over-the-top evil as, say, the Kazon are on the show, or this overall organization is within my setting. But nevertheless, they are very determined to get this ship because so much depends on it, and they themselves have to get it quickly. Otherwise, their superiors are going to notice, and then this whole thing is going to fall apart. And let's just say that towards the end of season 2, in fact in the season 2 finale, they finally get their hands on Voyager, but then Voyager gets it back, and the overall fiasco is so huge, and I would, by the way, still include the Talaxians in this, that the net result is the higher-ups hear about it, and then now we no longer have the subordinates to deal with, if you understand what I mean. Now the entire Empire is aware of Voyager and its technology and wants it. And that becomes the problem for Season 3. You see where I'm going with this? Now, for those of you who haven't put 2 and 2 together, the correlation, which I in all honesty, I didn't think about till after I'd written this down, was with the Dominion over in Deep Space Nine. The way the Dominion was approached, especially early on, obviously later on it just became the 3 species, the Vorta, the Jem'Hadar, and the Changelings. But before war actually broke out, we actually saw that the Dominion has a great deal of member species, a great deal of member worlds within it, whole organizations, whole systems of different species that work with under them. And admittedly, the Dominion is a little more we completely and utterly fascist about things than I'm talking about. But the parallels could obviously be drawn, which is one of the reasons I'm not sure this idea would work since DS9 was already doing it. So I do apologize for that, but just given the idea in a vacuum and not thinking about parallels, I think that would have worked a lot better, especially as a long-term villain, because that's what they wanted. A long-term villain. Why not make a long-term villain by making this whole area be dominated by this area? And in fact, by the way, for those of you who are wondering, this would also segue nicely into the Borg. This organization is only moderately militarily advanced, and they've only advanced to a certain point. And so once the Voyager crew gets to the point where they start to finally get out of this massive space of this horrible, Dominion 2, let's call it the Conclave, because I've been playing StarCraft lately. This Conclave, and they finally get out of Conclave space, or just towards the edge of it, and they start to notice that the Conclave basically stops following them. And I would have a whole episode about this, about how the Voyager crew basically is completely paranoid, constantly on edge, have no idea what's going on. They're battered, they're bruised, they're broken, they're low on supplies, they have no allies at this point. They're completely lost. Remember, Neelix has never been this far, so they're completely in the dark at this point. And the very last thing they would find out would be that they've just seen like their first sign of a Borg, not an actual Borg ship, just a piece of debris, something like that. As they keep going in this relative nothingness. Obviously, they're just in space, but no nearby systems, no nearby outposts. All those defense systems, all those defense webs, all those fleets that the Conclave employed, they're not here at all. And then they see a piece of Borg ship and they identify it as Borg. Cut to credits, and that's the end of season 3. That's how I would have done it. Anyways, I have talked on long enough, and I will talk about Siska later. So I'm going to upload this, and I'll talk to you guys later as well.